Thank you. You may be seated. It's good to see you. You know, my wife is a nurse, and for much of her nursing career, she was in, well, for almost all of it, she's been in women's services, but for much of it, she was a labor and delivery nurse. And part of the job of labor and delivery nurses is they fill out birth certificates, right? So they're the ones who write the name of the baby that becomes the official name of the baby. So it's actually an important job, an important part of it in the midst of everything. And so she's had to, over the years, and she's probably filled out more than we can count or remember, and all kinds of some crazy names, right? Stuff like, how do you spell that? And can you spell that again? And spell that one more time to make sure I get it right kind of names. And every now and then she wants to say, do you understand what that rhymes with? Or, what the kids are going to make fun of them later. But, it's not her job. She doesn't get to judge it. But in her years of doing labor and delivery, in her years of filling out birth certificates, there's a few names that she's never, ever put on a birth certificate. She's never put like Hitler on a birth certificate. No one's ever named their kid that, or Osama bin Laden. She's never put that on a birth certificate, or never put Beelzebub on a birth certificate. And reason, right? You know why, right? Because when you hear those names, you think evil, don't you? I mean, you just can't help it, right? And we even use some of those names to stand in. We call someone that because we think that they or what they are doing is bad and wrong and evil. And so those names are not names that many people use. Well, there's actually, and I think you guys, or many of you are going to know this, there's a few names in the Bible that really people think of and associate with evil, and probably two of the most common names that the moment I say it, the moment I speak the names, and the names of places, not names of people, but the moment I speak them, you're going to go, oh yeah, that was a bad place. In fact, some of you right now are guessing, aren't you? Some of you who like to work ahead, you're trying to fill in the notes already, Miss Tomlin, and so I had to call it out. I love you. But the names are Sodom and Gomorrah, right? Two cities in the ancient, what it wasn't at the time, but what would become the nation of Israel. There were these two cities, and the Bible says they were so evil, so bad, just full of wickedness and destruction and ugliness and sin and brokenness that God said, I am going to just destroy these cities, wipe them out, and we'll start over in those regions, start over again. And as God is saying this, right, there's a problem that God has, and not that God has a problem, but you understand, right, that there's an issue before God can destroy these cities, and the issue is this guy named Lot. Okay, and Lot was the nephew of Abram, the guy that we looked at, Abram and Sarai last week. He was Abram's nephew, and he left when Abram left his homeland, to go to the promised land. He went with him, and for many years they traveled together, and for many years they worshiped Jehovah, the God of the Bible, and for many years he walked with Abram. And then one day this little dispute came up, didn't it, over land and over sheep and over their flocks, and who was going to water where, and whose were bigger, and Lot wanted to increase his wealth and wanted to increase his power, and so Abram and Lot's workers begin to argue, and Abram said, look, this isn't good. This isn't a good thing, right? This isn't God honoring. So I tell you what, Lot, you take whatever land, whatever region you want, you take it, you go there, you live there, you take your sheep, you take your servants, you take those who work for you, and you live there, and I'll go whatever's left over. You get to choose. And Lot looks around, and he stands on this mountain, and he sees this city down there, the city of Sodom, and he goes, that's a place I can get wealthy. That's a place that has a lot of excitement going on. There's people coming and going, and so there's trade and opportunity, and there's nightlife, and there's all kinds of fun stuff to do. And so he looks, and the Bible says that he takes his flock, and those that work for him and his family, and they go and they move not into Sodom, but they move to the outskirts of Sodom and begin their life. And so it didn't take long, though, for him to move from the outskirts of Sodom into Sodom. And so when God says, I'm going to destroy it, here's the problem. God had made a promise that he would protect Abram and his family. And God always keeps his word. God always does what he says he's going to do. So how is he going to destroy these cities when Lot is living in the middle of it? And so today we're continuing our series. If you have your 4G guide, we're in week 2 of our stories they don't teach in Sunday school. And we're going to look at a story that I'm going to tell you, this is not a PG story, right? So this is a rough one. And yes, David, close your ears because I know you can't hear anything like this. But it is in the Bible, and it's in the Bible for a reason, and it has much to teach us. And what we're going to see today, it's such an important truth and such an important lesson, is what happens when you live next to evil. What happens to you? What happens to your family? What happens to those that you love? What happens to those that are close to you when you live? And it sort of sounds like a bad sitcom, doesn't it? You know what? It's like that's what it sounds like. But really and truly, we and you and I face this reality because we live in an evil world, and Lot lived in an evil world, and we're going to see what happened when he chose, not because he had to, but when he chose to live in an evil world. So God is, as we said, as God said, he's going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and he knows that he can't until he rescues Lot. So what God does is he sends 2 angels. Now, they're not the angels like, they are the angels that are scary angels, right? The angels that when people see, they say, hey, you know, please don't kill me. And the angels always have to say, fear not, right? Because they're afraid of them. But these are angels that are actually just disguised as men. And they show up in town, and they find Lot, and they find his family, and they say, and they tell Lot and his family, hey, you need to get out of town. And Lot and his family don't want to go, but they invite these angels to stay with them that night. And here's where we're going to pick up the story. And in Genesis 19, I'm going to start reading in verse 4. It says, but before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surround the house. And they called to Lot, where are these men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us that we may know them. Lot went out to the men at the entrance and shut the door after him. And he said, I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Behold, I have 2 daughters who have not known any man. Let me bring them out to you and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof. Now, let's take a deep breath here. All right, because this is a messed up story, isn't it? I mean, you look at this story and you go, who's the good guy in it? I mean, most Bible stories you can see like, all right, there's someone at least who's trying to follow God and someone who's at least trying to do good. And you look at this story and you go, this is just crazy. And this is just messed up. Here all the men of the city come and say, send us these 2 guys out for our enjoyment. And Lot says, no, don't do that. That's bad. Here you can have my daughters. And you're wondering like, what? Have you lost your mind, Lot? What is going on? And it's hard to understand and hard to explain. And you every time I read this story, and I've heard all kinds of people try to explain it away. I have 2 daughters, and I'm like, sorry, you come for somebody. I'm going to at least die trying to fight for them, right? I may not succeed, but I'm going to give everything I have. And so you look at this and you go, what in the world was Lot thinking? I mean, what was he thinking living in a place where this was even a possibility, right? What was he thinking that his answer to this problem, because he knows he can't just let the men take the angels because that's bad, and so he knows that. So what kind of thinking do you have when the answer is here, take my daughters instead? And here's the principle. We're going to see it throughout this entire story. We're going to see it throughout this entire time, and it's simply this, that when you choose to live with evil, it rubs off. Right? And the words here are very intentional, right? It's not when you live in an evil world it rubs off. Because we all live in an evil world, don't we? Maybe not like this evil, but we all live in an evil world. No, but when you choose to live with evil, it rubs off. And it leads us to a place and maybe a way of living that we cannot even begin to imagine. If we had time, we'd look at the whole story of Lot, but it's multiple chapters. But here's what we would see. We would see that when Lot and Abram break off, right? Like break up, so to speak, that Lot moves close to Sodom. And isn't that what we do with sin? In fact, I think this is sort of a pathway that often we get trapped in with sin where we begin with not, hey, I'm not going to really participate. I'm just going to see how close I can get. Let me just see how close I can get without actually sinning. I mean, how many, for years I was in student ministry and we would talk about, saving yourself for marriage. You know what the question everyone asked me and young adults asked me for years? Well, how far is too far? Right? The question, right, the thing that we want to know is how close can I get before it's actually sin? And what you see in the story of Lot is that he looks around and he goes, well, okay, at first I'm not going to live in Sodom because I can see how evil and broken and messed up it is, but I want to make some money and I need to get close to it, so let me see how close I can get to sin. And then it goes from there, though, right? Because Lot doesn't just say, okay, I'm going to live on the outskirts and make my money and take care of my family, because the next thing he does is he does what? He moves into the city of Sodom. And what that sort of step is the, well, this isn't so bad step. Right? We know it's not what God wants us to do. We know it's actually sin. We know that this is not God's best, but we look around and go, well, look, I'm not hurting anyone. And I'm still doing okay. My family's fine. And look, I've got plenty of money in my bank account and everything's going well for me. And so, hey, it's not really like it's not that bad. I mean, I thought that if I did this that it would be a lot worse than it is, and it's really not that bad. And so we take that second step in the sin journey, right? The first one is how close can I get? The second is it's not that bad, which leads to the third, which is, well, this is just normal. This is just what people do. This is just how people live. It's Lot, because what we discover is right when those angels appear, Lot was not just living in the city of Sodom. He was actually one of the leaders in the city of Sodom. He was actually we would call it the city council. He was in that kind of a role there where he was even respected. Because why? Because the sin that at one point seemed so unthinkable to him, he just took a step to it and a step closer and a step closer. And then at this point, he's just like everyone else. This is normal. Like some of you, we lost some plants in the Great Freeze, right? The I don't know, polar vortex of 21, whatever we're calling it. We got to make up names for stuff. It was cold, all right? And we lost a few plants. We were actually surprised at how many came back, but we lost some. And here's the deal. If you notice, like right over there, they're doing some landscaping. The state, I guess, is doing it there, and it's looking pretty good. And there were some plants that were sitting, when they dropped them all off, there were some plants that we lost that were in some pots there. And I'm driving by and I'm telling you, listen, let me tell you what popped in the back of my mind. Boy, you could just drive by and get one of those and nobody would even notice. Like that popped into my head. And listen, I don't go around stealing people's plants, right? That's not what I do. It's not how I live. Plenty of y'all would give me plants if I asked to, right? I'm going to say it now. And I bet you I have plants in my yard next week that I didn't even know were there, because that's the way loving and giving and kind people you are. But it popped in my head. Okay. 2 days later, they'd actually done all of the planting, and there were a few that were sitting over there on the side, like you could tell that they were done and left over. And here's what goes into my head. They're not even going to need those. They're probably going to throw those away. Like, I'm telling you, and I'm like driving, I'm like, where is that coming from? And I'm thinking to myself, like, why is that even in my, because that's not who I am, and that's not what I do, but it pops into my head, they're not going to need, and then I go, dude, I paid for those anyway with all that tax money I paid, and I'm not getting anything out of it. I ought to at least be able to get a plant. 2 days later, they're sitting there, and they're even further out of the area where they're working, and they're laid over on the side. And I'm thinking to myself, they're going to let those things go to waste. I should just go take them. And here's the thing that scared me on that third time. Because the first time was sort of funny. Like, that's just stupid. Like, I'm never going to go and steal some plants from a job site. Come on, Stephen. Really? And then the second day, it was like, well, come on, you can justify it. And then the third time, it was like, dude, that makes sense. And I begin to justify sin. Now, okay, just for clarity, I did not take the plants, all right? They're probably still there. They might even be dead now. And maybe I should have. I don't know. You get to decide that. God does. But here's what I know. How easy it is for one little thing to pop into your mind. And what happens? We begin to feed it, don't we? And we begin to justify it, don't we? And we begin to make excuses and reasons and all of the different stuff, the why we could do what it is that we want to do, all along knowing that it's just wrong. It's just flat out called sin. And I'm telling you, when you and I choose to live with, whether it's externally or internally, evil, it begins to rub off in our life. And Satan, our enemy, is brilliant and gifted and so committed not to, listen, Satan's not going to come up to me tomorrow and say, Stephen, you ought to go rob a bank. Right? Because that's just dumb. Like, I wouldn't do well in prison, so I'm not going to do that, right? That's just foolish. But he's going to test me. And he's going to test you. And he's going to say, hey, will you justify this little thing? Hey, will you justify this small thing? No one's ever going to know. And it's not that big a deal, and you deserve it. And come on, it's going to waste anyway. So why not just do what you want to do? And pretty soon, sin begins to grow and grow and grow in our lives. And that's what had happened to Lot. And if it had just stopped there, it would have been tragic and sad and broken enough, but it doesn't, because those angels come to Lot. And as the men in the town are pressing in, it calls all of the angels, cause them to go blind, pulls Lot and his family back into the house, and he says, you guys right now, you need to flee. Don't like take time to pack your bags. Don't give a 3-month plan to get out of the sin, to get away from it. He says right now, right in this moment, you need to gather everyone up, gather up what you can carry, and you need to leave. You need to leave, and you need to never look back. Do not even look back at the city. Do not even look back at the sin that you had become so accustomed to, that was such a part of your life. It is time for you to flee like your very life depends on it, because it does. And it says, I want to read to you what verse 17 says in this chapter, because it's so important. And as they brought them out, one of the angels said, escape for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the valley. Escape to the hills, lest you be swept away. I mean, I know they're talking about physically escaping, but what if we looked at our sin that way? Like, okay, we know what it's doing, we know what's happening, because here's the fourth step in the sin journey, is that it always leads to destruction. Right? Nothing ever stays small. Nothing is ever insignificant. It always grows. It always consumes. It always takes over, and it always leads to destruction. And what if we looked at it and said, you know what, my sin, I need to escape it for my life and not ever look back at it again, and not stop like part of it, like, hey, it's no big deal, I'm going to play around with this a little bit. No, don't be close to it. He says, just get away so you're not swept away by your sin. And that's what they tell Lot and his family to do. His son-in-laws are not willing to go. It's Lot and his daughters and his wife. And again, many of you know the story that on their way out, she stops, and what does she do? She turns back and looks, longing, hurting, wondering why she has to leave everything that's familiar to her. And when she does, she turns into a pillar of salt, and it leaves Lot. And all that's really left at this point are Lot and his daughters. I'd imagine just sort of where Lot, when he entered and left Abram, he had flocks of sheep, and he had servants and people who were working for him. He was a wealthy man and increasing his wealth. And then he ends up going close to Sodom, and his wealth grows. And then he becomes a respected political figure in this city. And now he's standing here as both Sodom and both Gomorrah are completely destroyed. Nothing is even left, and it's just him and his daughters, and probably whatever they could carry in their hands, which really isn't much, right? Some of you, I remember my sister when the fires came, it was like, just get in your car and go, and you don't have time to get, and you always wish there's that one thing you wish you had gotten, right? No matter how much you get, there's always that one thing, and so here's what's happening is that Lot and his daughters are just left alone. Now, if the story ended here, it would be tragic, wouldn't it? But unfortunately, it doesn't end here. And I want to keep reading in verse 30 of this chapter of Genesis 19. It says, "Now Lot went up out of Zoar and lived in the hills with his 2 daughters, for he was afraid to live in Zoar, and so he lived in a cave with his 2 daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, 'Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come into us after the manner of all the earth. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, that we may preserve offspring from our father.' So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father, and he did not know when she lay down or when she arose." All right, I don't know who came up with this plan, but as bad as Lot's plan was, this is even crazier, isn't it? I mean, you look at it, and again, you're thinking, you thought what was going on with Lot and at the beginning is bad, and then you look at this, and you're going, what in the world were you thinking? Let's get dead drunk, and let's make sure we have children. You understand a little bit, right? You can understand their fear, because their fear was that they're going to be left alone, and one day their father's going to die, and there's not going to be a son or someone to help take care. There's not going to be someone to pass on the name, and so we're going to be left even worse off than we are. And you can hear their fear. Well, no one's going to care for us, and no one's going to love us, and no one's going to provide for us, and all the things that cause fear. And as we talked about last week with Abram, like fear causes us to do some unthinkable things, doesn't it? And you can see the fear that they have. You can see the brokenness that they have, and yet in the midst of that, what do we ask? How in the world could they do that? And it comes back to the same very thing that we said: when you choose to live with evil, it rubs off. When you choose to live with evil, it rubs off. In their case, it caused them to do something vile and unthinkable to us, doesn't it? Because all that they had known their whole life was the brokenness and evil of Sodom. That's all they knew. That's the only standard that they had to live by. And the standard that they had to live by was, you got to take care of yourself. So it doesn't matter what's right. It doesn't matter what God says. It doesn't matter what you know you should or should not do. It matters that you do what you think is best for you, even if we look at it. And even if in that time they looked at it and go, that is nothing short of vile and disgusting. But when we choose to live with evil, like Lot chose to live, it didn't just rub off on him, did it? It rubbed off on the next generation. And it rubbed, so what happens is it continues down generation to generation to generation. And let's look at what happens here in these last few verses that I want to look at. It says, "Thus both of the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and called his name Moab. He is the father of the Moabites to this day. And the younger also bore a son and called his name Ben-Ammi. He is the father of the Ammonites to this day." Now, some of you, if you're thinking, you've heard those people groups before, right? Because they both have sons, and those sons have sons, and carries on. They become an entire people, the Moabites and the Ammonites. And if you sort of maybe have heard them, those are two nations that, right, for years, for hundreds of years, end up oppressing the Israelites, end up oppressing the Jewish people. They're always at battle. They're always at war. There's always just tension and strife between these people groups, and it starts right back here. In fact, if you go through the book of Judges, you're going to see that these two countries are the two countries that do the most damage to the Jewish people over that time. If you look all the way through the up until Babylon comes on the scene, these are the two people groups that end up causing the most pain for God's chosen people. And it started because a guy named Lot said, let's see how close to sin I can get. It started because a guy named Lot said, you know what, I'm not going to do what's right. I'm not going to do what honors God. I'm going to do what's going to be best for me. And he began a cycle that caused pain and damage and brokenness for generations to come, because he forgot that when you choose to live close to evil, it rubs off. So here's the challenge for us, right? You don't have to look far to see evil in our world, do you? You don't have to look far to see brokenness in our world. And there's a part of us, maybe some of you, that would think, man, wouldn't it be great if we could just all go to some island, some really nice tropical island, and leave all the ugliness of this world, and we can just sit on the beach and chill and enjoy life and not have to put up with all of this. By the way, that's called a cult if anyone asks you to do that. But there's a part of us that understands it, right? That wants to leave this ugliness of this world and just get away from it. But you and I can't do that, can we? You and I can't just move away and be out. In fact, God doesn't even want us to, because He tells us we're supposed to be a light in this dark world. So how can we be a light if we don't go into the darkness, if we don't go to the places that we work, and if we don't go to have friendships and relationships with other people? How are we going to make a difference? So there's a struggle here, isn't there? Because we have to live with and around evil and brokenness. So how do we keep it from rubbing off on us? How do we keep in this evil world from rubbing off on it? And the answer is so simple, and it's one that I wish Lot had understood, that you keep evil from rubbing off by dealing with your sin. Look, not the sin of the world, not the sin of others. We keep evil from rubbing off in our life by dealing with our own sin, our own struggles, our own choices. Lot made a choice. He made a choice to move close to Sodom. He made a choice to move into Sodom. He made a choice to lead Sodom. The same progression we have. How close can I get? It's not so bad. It's normal. And then it leads to destruction. But I'm telling you, if we want to break that progression in our lives, if we want to keep our sin from consuming us and destroying us and hurting not just ourselves, but our children and generations to come, then here's what I want to challenge you and I to do. It means that if we want to deal with our sin, we don't make excuses. We don't make excuses like, I have to work here. We don't make excuses like, I have to live here, or I have to watch this, or I have to participate in this. We stop making excuses. We stop making excuses like this isn't that big of a deal, or I'm not hurting anyone. We stop making excuses by saying like, my sin was just a mistake or an accident, or the worst of all, their fault. Like someone else made us do it. If we want to deal with our sin and keep it from taking over, we need to call sin what it is. It is evil, and it is rebellious, and it is destructive, and it is prideful. That I think I can ignore what my God says because somehow I know better. Somehow God's doesn't understand my circumstances, or what's going on in my life, or the world that we live in today. I mean, God just cannot understand that, right? How prideful is that? That I think I know better than God. Until we are willing to call sin what it is, and it is evil. I don't care if it's a big sin or a little sin, like taking some pots of plants that don't belong to you. I don't care how you rate it or I rate it. Every one of them is evil and it's ugly, and we need to call it what it is. Guys, I worry for our world today, because I grew up in a time where it felt like all the time in church, all we talked about was sin and how bad you are. And every time you left church, you sort of felt like, well, golly, I'm just the biggest loser in the world. And I don't want to be that kind of church where it just beats up on everyone. But I think, unfortunately, what we've done is we've swung the pendulum the other way, where we're afraid to just call sin what it is. It's sin. And I'm not talking about if all you're doing is going around pointing at other people and their sin, then you're missing the point. I'm asking you, will you and I look in the mirror and say, and stop making excuses and just say, God, this is ugly, and I don't want it in my life anymore. If we want to deal with the sin and keep it from taking over like it took over Lot's life, we must not make excuses. But it doesn't stop there. It says also we don't pursue evil, right? And here's what I mean by that, is that once we identify sin, we stop pursuing it. You cannot control what Hollywood puts out, but you don't have to watch it. You can't control what's on social media, but you don't have to read it. You can't control how others live, but you don't have to join in with them. I don't have to participate in the evil of this world, even though it's all around me, and I can choose to not pursue it. I can actually choose to flee it. One of the great examples of this is this guy named Joseph, who was sold by his own brothers because they didn't like him, because he was his dad's favorite, right? He's the youngest and he was dad's favorite. And listen, I've seen a lot of sibling rivalry, but so hating your younger brother so much that you sell him into slavery, which is better than killing him, I guess, but that's what they did. And he ends up in the house of one of Pharaoh's leaders, one of the Pharaoh's great, high-ranking officials. And the wife of this man, Potiphar, sort of likes Joseph and says, "You know what, Joseph, I want you." And she begins to pursue him. Now, remember, Joseph is a slave. He has very few options. And if he says no, he could die. If he says yes, he could die. It's like a no-win situation. And he continues to try to push her off and find ways around and avoids her until finally one day she traps him, grabs a hold of his cloak. And what does he do? He runs so fast and so strongly that he just runs right out of his clothes and is running down the street, just nothing on. Because to him, that was better than being trapped in sin. To him, that was better. He'd rather die that way. He'd rather be thrown in prison that way than sin. And no one would see, and he probably would never get caught. And it would probably benefit him because he'd probably have favor in the house and get some extra food and get some extra stuff and have some extra privileges, right? Everything was really on the upside. But he said, I would rather do what's right and flee from my sin than somehow pursue evil just because it's to my advantage. Oh, that we would have the same passion to do what's right, to run rather than pursue evil. Which leads us to the third thing, if we really want to deal with sin and keep it from, controlling us, is that we must repent of evil. All that repent means is changing direction. It's asking for forgiveness. It's making right what we've done wrong. Like, that's huge. Most of us don't have a problem asking for forgiveness. The making right part, I don't want to have to go say I'm sorry. I don't want to have to go return the pot. Right? I don't want to have to go do whatever it takes to make it right, but that's what repentance means. It means to ask forgiveness, to make it right, and then ask for help. Don't do it alone. Don't do it in darkness. Don't serve the evil where no one else can see it and just think there's no one that's going to believe you or help you. No, it means that we ask for help. Because here's the good news in this story. And you'd have to read almost the entire Bible to get the good news of the story. Because believe it or not, there is some good news. Because you see, generations later, there's a Moabite woman who marries a man. And he passes away. And that Moabite woman follows her mother-in-law back to her homeland, where she meets another guy who she marries and takes care of him. And then a few generations, they have a great-great-grandson by the name of King David. And then generations after that, in that same line, one day the Messiah comes through that. And of all of the people who are listed in the lineage, the genealogy of Jesus, there are 4 women. And one of them is a woman named Ruth, the Moabite. The only one, the foreigner, the one who goes back to this time and all the evil and the brokenness, and yet God still through that does something amazing and beautiful. And she is listed as one of the people we need to remember. Like, her name is listed as someone to remember for her faith in Jesus. So here's what it means that when we turn from our evil, no matter how bad and broken it is, God is still good. And God can still do something good in us and through us. But what made Ruth different is that she turned from the gods of her people and turned to the one true God. And it changed her life, and it changed generations. So I'm going to ask you today, and it's not an easy question, but are you ready to deal with sin? Not your neighbor's sin. Like, I'm not asking you to deal with your husband's sin or your wife's sin. Many of you are happy to do that, right? You look around and say, honey, here, you need to listen to that, right? If that's our takeaway, we're missing it, right? I'm asking you, are you ready to deal with really, it should say, with your sin? Because if you are, stay close to Jesus. Stay close to Him and the life that He has for you. Spend time reading your Bible. Spend time in prayer. Spend time serving. It means not just that we stay close to Jesus, but when we have sin in our life, we confess it, that we fix it, that we do whatever it takes to make it right. And it means that we always need to consider the consequences of our actions. Is this thing that seems so little, is it moving me closer to God or further from Him? Is it moving me closer to God or further of Him? Guys, it's time for us as people, as children of God, to take sin more seriously. Not that we have to beat ourselves up, not that we mess up and suddenly we think, oh, there's no hope and there's nothing I can do about it, because there's always hope in Jesus, but it only comes when we are willing to turn from the brokenness and the sin of this world. Here's the thing I wish I had understood as a much younger man. You know when the best time to deal with your sin? When it's small. When it's a thought in your head, take the pot. That's easy to deal with, isn't it? And that's the best time to deal with it, when it's up here, before we've actually done it, before we've actually followed through with it. And deal with your sin when it's small. You know when the next best time to deal with it is? Right now. Right now. So I'm going to challenge you in just a moment. Samuel's going to come up and lead us in a time of singing. And I hope that you'll sing and follow along. But more importantly than that, I hope that you'll take a moment as we sing and go, God, is there any sin in my life? Is there any sin in my life that I need to deal with it? Because today, whether it's small, I'd like to deal with that, or whether it's large, but I'm going to deal with that. God, whatever it is that I need to deal with, if there's a person that I need to forgive, let me forgive them today. If there's something that I do in secret that no one knows, let me stop and get some help in that. If there's a way I'm treating a person, or a business dealing that I have, or something going on with my children, God, whatever it is, today I want to deal with my sin, because I don't want to end up like Lot, because sin always leads to destruction. It always leads to destruction. And so, God, today, let me deal with my sin.